So, for those of you who love Fortnite and you love that kind of loot box-esque, repetitive, I'm just chilling with my friends kind of gameplay, have at it. However, I don't like it. I'd rather play The Witcher for the 5th time again. Every single time.
We're live. We're live, boys. We are fucking live. Alright, start this shit up.
Hello, YouTube. This is Jeff with lag.
We're live, bro!
So that's what I'm going to be doing for the beginning.
Excellent.
All right.
So, I've been having this thought process recently about, maybe you guys hear about how people talk about how video games aren't what they were, or that video games aren't as good as they used to be, or something like that. And I just recently had an epiphany that curtailed in my mind that kind of leads to why the discussion's happening. And that pretty much stems essentially from a problem with my generation and the next generation. So we're talking about millennials versus Gen Zers, Gen Y versus Gen Z, Centennials. And it's not your fault, Centennials. I need to preface that by saying that. It's not your fault, we caused it. But there's a lot of explanation that needs to begin with it. The first being that there are many of you who are in the next generation who don't know what it's like to game without being online with someone. Alright? So when we have that, we have a situation where if you're from my generation, or Jeff's, or Michael's, or to some extent Nick's and Eunice's, but really it's the older of the three of us, when we gamed together, we had to be at each other's house. And if you say something like you say to someone on League or Fortnite or any of those other games, back then you were saying it to someone who was sitting in the same room with you. And you can't really get away with someone calling someone a jackass cunt fuck, you know. You can't do that because they're there with you. Blows are going to come. Alright? I'm not saying that's a bad thing now. I'm just saying, hear me out. Eventually, there was, well, I'll start back. Like, even with old school gaming on like when gaming got good on the NES, like you have these old games that were very nostalgic about, like Super Mario Bros, Mega Man, the older Zeldas, and then even on into like Nintendo 64 and PlayStation, like Final Fantasy, Ocarina of Time, where we got immense amount of time hours out of. Now understand, we don't get those same time hours out anymore because technology has performed. We don't have a problem with that. The problem occurs when, and this is where I'll say something that I think really matters. No, there's still more history, actually. So, there was this game on Nintendo 64 that was a better multiplayer game than it was a single-player game. And that game was GoldenEye. Alright? That is a game you played with 3 of your buddies in your living room together. Way more than you played it by yourself. I'm sure there's other people who have actually beaten the game and stuff like that, but really no one cared about that. Everyone cared about playing it together. Much in the same way, eventually Call of Duty came about. Modern Warfare. That was the big one. I enjoyed it with my friends. Never owned the game personally, but I'd go to friends' houses and we played it, and you know, you have good times or whatever. But there's never a toxicity there, because again, you're sitting next to these people, and if you did that, you're not friends. If one of my friends, my close friends, called me a terrible thing while I'm sitting next to him, at the very least, I'm not going to be friends with them. At the worst, it's going to come to something awful, right? So, that's essentially where the disconnect comes. Where when you get things like Modern Warfare, and it's fun with your buddies who you know very well together, but when you're playing by yourself, it becomes very repetitive and very toxic because there's a lot of people who aren't worried about how they treat you, because they're never going to talk to you again. So there's no consequence for it, right? And I say that because I understand that a lot of you Gen Zers don't remember a time before that. And even if you have played those games, maybe you don't have the nostalgic feel for it, which is fine. But then that leads me to a point that when a lot of us older people are talking about why we're asking the question, why aren't games as good as they were anymore? We're talking about single player RPG games. For me, what started Gamergate was Mass Effect 3, which was a lot of promises, a lot of things being said, and they delivered on none of it. And when everyone called them out on it, they went into their shell and said, nope, you're a liar, you're an idiot. So for someone who's never had a real RPG experience, most of your gaming is done online. Most of it's done with no story elements whatsoever. It's just a repetitive thing, and that's what you enjoy. Well, you know what? As much as I hate to say it, Fortnite kind of becomes a valid game. Particularly with the price tag being free. You know what I mean? So the older generation starts to worry when you have, we had The Witcher 3, but that's pretty much it. But then you have good things like EA putting out Fallen Order, but that's an exception to the rule at this point. There isn't a whole lot of single player, just relaxation type of games that we want. What about Minecraft? Well, we don't really like Minecraft. Alright? Us older guys, we like a game that has story elements and we're driving toward a goal and we're doing stuff because it's got that. That's why we liked Witcher 3 so much. We really liked that game. So there has to be some sort of breaking point and some sort of point where we can come together on a lot of this, and I don't know where that is. There are tons of people, Michael especially, who will sit there and say, I don't actually particularly care about the story of the game. I just care about the gameplay, which is fine. I'm not like that. I need to have a really good story element, otherwise the gameplay aspect of it doesn't matter, because I sit there and go, well, I don't particularly care. Because what am I driving to? What am I trying to do? This is supposed to be a story that's being told to me. And that I have a hand in, but it's not there. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about video game stuff. And recently, EA started to get it right, but the fact of the matter is, before they let Respawn do it, their properties that they had were supposed to be single-player RPG were ruined. No. Were ruined by trying to add multiplayer elements to it. By trying to create that sort of thing. And that's where the issue comes. I hope Jedi Fallen Order showed that to you, EA, Activision, and the rest, that there is a big market for people who want a single-player experience. Okay, for years, that's what we were told. There's no market for a single-player experience. Well, Fallen Order's doing pretty good. And that's mind-boggling, and especially when you look at the history of stuff. When these companies are taking properties or taking developers and putting them on things that they're like, we want this to be multiplayer, we want this to be even an MMO experience, and it doesn't particularly work out that well. Mass Effect 3 is the biggest example I can say. That game suffered because they tried to add multiplayer to it. Anyway, so for those of you who love Fortnite and you love that kind of loot box-esque, repetitive, I'm just chilling with my friends kind of gameplay, have at it. However, I don't like it. I'd rather play The Witcher for the 5th time again. Every single time. For those of us in the older generation, I think that's what we're looking for. I got a Switch, and there's some games I like on it, but then I get like the Mario or the Luigi game, and I'm sitting there going, this is really short and really not geared to me. Like, I remember playing Super Mario Brothers on the Super Nintendo, and it was hard. You sat there with your buddies trying different levels over and over and over and dying over and over. Like, that's the point of Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a callback to the old Mario and Mega Man games where you learn through failure. And I think that ends up being where the disconnect is. That's why we sit there and say games aren't as good as they were, because they're too simple for us. We are forged in the fires. I'm not trying to say you suck if you like Fortnite. I'm saying that the gameplay is similar to most other games and it's boring. Especially now that we're adults, we finally got to the point. I know a lot of friends who are sitting there going, man, the second I got a job, I'm going to spend money on it. And now that we're finally able to spend money on it, we sit there and go, man, like, I wish I had been able to do this in the 90s because there were so many other games I would have rather had then than I do now. Anyway, you guys can tell me what you think about this. I'm sure we'll chop it up, and there you go. Alright, peace.